Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 67 of the Meet the Parents podcast and your weekly dose of parenting chat. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and this week I'm joined again by Simon from Man vs Pink. Good evening, Simon.
Good evening, Tim.
So it's just the two of us this week, so we're going to have a little chat about the changing nature and expectations of fatherhood. While promoting his forthcoming film last week, George Clooney talked frankly about his experience as a father of 3-month-old twins at the age of 56, in a way that struck me as being very much the epitome of the modern 21st century dad. It got me thinking about how much the expectations of what fatherhood entails has changed in the 40-odd years since I was born, and how in some ways it probably hasn't really changed that much at all. In the interview, Clooney comes across as being actually quite a good role model. You get the impression that he's quite involved as a father, and not the distant, silent, emotionally stunted comic book character that he played when taking on the lead role in Batman and Robin. So all through my childhood and early adult years, there was a real shortage of positive dad role models. You know, most heroic men were steadfastly single and solitary and would rather be risking life and limb battling to save the planet than helping with a night feed or changing a nappy. TV fathers of that era were frequently buffoons. Look no further than the likes of Homer Simpson. Yeah, sensitive, caring family men were very much in the minority. I got about as far as the Cosby Show's Cliff Huxtable, then jumped straight to Modern Family's Phil Dunphy. So Simon, I'm happy to defer to you as the comics expert here. They're even rarer in the comic book world, aren't they?
Well, there's a kind of a slight running joke of superhero origin stories often involving a dead parent. And obviously in Batman that's the case, and in Spider-Man, Peter Parker is an orphan already, and then his kind of de facto father, his uncle, he's kind of responsible for partly anyway for being killed in the first place. That's kind of partly the origin of the character. Superman as well had a father who died when he was a baby, and then another father in the movie anyway who died when he was younger. But one thing you can take from this is that the role of the father is kind of very important to these characters. There's a nurturing aspect even just by their character before they passed away, sadly, in these stories that's kind of very powerful. And it has a real resonance with the sort of the superhero they will become. I think I still found them interesting role models that in the concept of fatherhood, and also what it means to be a father as well. It's not just a biological role. It's really about the kind of influence you want to have on the child.
From these comic book stories, actually, the one thing that really comes home is that whether there's a father absent or present, they still have a profound impact on the way that their sons' lives have been shaped, haven't they?
I think it's a bit of a cliche, like it's always about, fathers and sons, and that's the sort of narrative or character arc. I still feel it's something positive I gained from reading these stories growing up. Yeah, like you're saying, the positive impact of the role of the father and how that reflects upon the child.
The one superhero that did jump to mind when it came to thinking about role models of fatherhood was Bob Parr in The Incredibles, which still one of my absolute favourite animated films ever, and the role of the father there is really central to the core of the story because it's about his role within the family and the importance of not pushing them away and getting them involved.
Oh, also the story, as you catch it in there, he's basically in a crisis, living this compromised life, which is kind of often a way many men feel. I'm not saying I feel like that, but just the idea that you have these ideas of what you're going to do when you're younger, and then you've got to keep a roof over their heads and pay the rent and pay the bills and that kind of thing. And this is taken to the extreme in The Incredibles, isn't it? He's had to give up his entire life because of other aspects of the story and become an insurance salesman or something. He's still trying to be heroic. Even when the 9 to 5 is grinding him down, he's still doing his best to try and be heroic.
And as the film progresses, you start off in the situation where in his pre-family life, he is his role as a man is defined by the things that he does and the feats that he's capable of achieving. Whereas by the end of the film, he realises that his role has been redefined as the role of a father, and how he interacts and the influence and the positive impact he has on his family. So yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting and unusual story from the kind of the comic book superhero genre of where fatherhood is portrayed in a positive way by the presence of a father rather than by the absence of one. In the real world, can you think of any positive role models of fathers from when you were growing up, whether that was your own father or perhaps, other male role models?
My father growing up was the epitome of the working dad, and worked 9 to 5 or often longer, and didn't really see that much of him. So I wouldn't say that was a good role model in terms of how his role was. I'm not saying it was necessarily by choice, but he was never, like now, people take shifts in picking up from the school gates and doing parent teacher evenings or things like that. That wasn't what happened. It was all my mother doing that stuff. So no, that wasn't a real world role model. This is a real cliche, but I remember seeing Mr. Mom in the Mr. Mom, in the 80s would have had an influence. And I became a stay-at-home dad for 5 years. It was a film I really liked at the time. It's a ridiculous film, and there are elements of sexism about it, but largely it's just a ridiculous film, and very 80s. But I remember just seeing it and really liking it, and that just put this little dagger in my mind about what's the deal with why shouldn't a guy stay at home with the kids? Why has it got to be the mother? And it just kind of never left.
For me, my dad was, fortunately for me, quite a positive role model. Now, when I was still very young, he gave up practicing law. He was a criminal barrister, which was a far from stable profession in terms of working hours and pay, which was largely dependent on clients' legal fees. So, instead he took on a standard 9 to 5 office job. So I guess a little bit like Bob Parr in The Incredibles, and he played a really significant role in my formative years. My mum worked night shifts as a nurse. Meant that my daily routine 3 or 4 days a week involved Dad getting me up and ready for school, and then handing me over to Mum as she returned home from work to take me to school. She would then sleep during the day, pick me up from school, and then hand me back to Dad when he got home from work so that she could then head off to her work, leaving him to handle my bedtime. And, it was quite a convoluted arrangement, but actually in many ways maybe a little bit more similar to what we experience in modern parenthood, where both parents are working. And, when I look back on it, it meant that I grew a really close bond with my dad. He was involved. He was quite hands-on. He wasn't, I guess, the stereotype of the 1970s working man. Instead, he was the person I had breakfast with, and the person who read me stories and tucked me into bed, as well as the one who took me out to do the more kind of traditional father-son stuff, like, playing cricket in the park at weekends. I guess I'd spent a lot more time with my dad than most kids of my generation would have done. I don't doubt that it's really shaped the kind of dad that I've wanted to be. I mean, Simon, have you picked up any particular cues or habits that you've adopted as a dad, either from your own father or from other people?
This is going to sound really harsh, but often it's more about not doing what they did and thinking about that. The kind of way I approach parenting is just a world away from the kind of way my father was able to do that role. I don't know, like you were saying, it was kind of more the norm at the time in the 70s and 80s. I think I refer back to that as a way not to do things, and I'm glad things have progressed. So that's really the kind of way I think about it, is that, just being a father that's there and a father that's able to do these things, able to kind of juggle work and do school pickups and things. And as I know, we'll probably touch on this later, but going back to work, one of the first things I established was that I need flexible hours. I need to sometimes start late and finish late, and sometimes start really early and leave early, and for that to be okay. And that's not something that would ever have happened in my father's era.
No, absolutely. And some of that is a product of the times, isn't it? I mean, things culturally are very different now to how they were in, both our father's time. And And it's interesting you talk about flexible working as well. I noticed that there's a new big survey that's come out today that shows that actually it's not just mums who want flexible working. Dads want them as well, and it shows how much the difference between the roles of mums and dads in a lot of modern families now have, they're much less distinctly different than they used to be.
You often hear read articles and hear stories about the sort of stresses of being a working mother, and that often plays into this idea of the working mother that needs the flexible hours, and the working mother that will need to leave at a moment's notice if their child is sick, and I think all of that needs to be owned by fathers as well, and they need to be as equally expected in a workplace that a father will need flexible hours, that a father will need to dash off to school at a moment's notice. I think more fathers need to be making these same requirements for flexible working.
Yeah, and one of the things that we found, with both of us working, although my wife works part-time rather than full-time, is that, when one of the kids has become sick, as they inevitably do, they get colds, flu, chicken pox, all that kind of stuff, is that it hasn't always automatically been my wife that's taken the time off work to care for them. Now, in honesty, probably maybe 2/3 of the time it's been her that has, simply because she has a less demanding work schedule and more non-working days than I do. But I've spent my fair share of time at home looking after an ill kid while frantically trying to keep an eye on emails at the same time. So, and you're absolutely right. It shouldn't automatically be the mother. It's whoever's day is less disrupted by being at home, and sometimes that's my wife, and sometimes that's me.
Yeah, and exactly. I think that's how we've approached it as well. My wife's work has tended to be more meetings based, and lots of sort of physical things going on, meeting people, doing workshops, that kind of thing. That's the stuff that's kind of harder to shift to working from home. One of the things I was always keen to do was to try and get a job that involves sitting. It may sound a weird aspiration, but find a job that involves sitting at a computer, because then I could do it, in real terms about doing my job as easily sitting at my table at home as sitting in the office at work.
Talking about work, obviously, as we've spoken about before, you recently returned to full-time work just in the last couple of months or so, and you've been through, I guess, 3 distinct stages, haven't you? You've been a stay-at-home dad of a preschool child, then a stay-at-home dad with a primary school child, and now one half of a working couple with a school-aged child. So now that you're both working, how are you managing school drop-offs and after-school club pickups and all the logistics between the two of you?
Well, so far so good. We have we're often sending each other Google Calendar invites about who's doing what and that kind of thing. It's being managed like by account. It has to be, because it's not a set schedule about who does what day. It depends on meetings and that kind of thing. And more often than not, it's driven by what things my wife's got going on, because my job is much more sort of fluid and malleable, which is good. But so far so good. I think one of my biggest worries is because we both work in London on a train line that's not prone, but it's been known to kind of go up the spout from time to time, as it did last night actually, but luckily after the rush hour. It's just both being stuck in London and not being able to get out, and it's not the end of the world. We've got lots of friends around here and family in the next door town. It would all be doable, but that's not happened yet. But then it's only been a few months, so there's plenty of time for that to happen.
I mean, other than 3 separate stints of maternity leave, we've always been a dual income family. I've always worked full time, while Heather's worked various arrangements that allow her to do between 60 and 80% of a full time job spread over a combination of working hours. So that means she's always done the majority of drop-offs and pickups, and her current working arrangements mean that she does pretty much all of them at the moment. But have you ever considered that there might be a scenario where you and your wife swapped roles, where you worked full-time and she became a stay-at-home mum, or worked part-time?
In some respects, that ship has sailed, because we've only got the one child, and now she's at school, so the need for a parent to be at home all the time just isn't there anymore anyway. But I'm sure there's conversations to be had about reduced hours and other things around that if we can. But in the in the short to medium term, I've been at home with our daughter for years, so we kind of got some cash reserves to build up, shall we say. So we're kind of working on that at the moment, really. It's good to be in this position, finally, where we can sort of be in a more comfortable position. So that's what we're working on. But we haven't taken our eye off work-life balance, broadly speaking, in terms of the family. So, yeah, I think it's something that would happen to a degree, vice versa, down the line. I think there's certainly a desire there. And just the way modern roles can work. We're both kind of within sort of quite flexible roles. There are aspects within those that could lead to, I don't know, an element of having reduced working hours or something like that. But I think that's way down the line. It's not something we're thinking about at the moment, for sure. Initially, when I became a stay-at-home dad anyway, it was that I was more suited to being home with the baby. Like my wife's very sociable. She likes speaking to people all the day and things like that. And I'm just as happy in my own company as not. And with a young baby, it's kind of it's a one-sided conversation for most of the day. I was fine with that. I was absolutely fine, sort of hanging out with our daughter all day, and that would have driven her nuts.
I've got a couple of dad friends who have working partners who only work 4 days a week, and one just reduced his hours, while the other works a full week's worth of hours in 4 days and then has the 5th day off. But I guess the one obvious thing that they have in common is that it makes financial sense insofar that both their wives earn, similar or more money than they do. And I guess that's probably the one thing that's always put me off seriously thinking about working reduced hours, because it would be quite a considerable financial penalty.
Well, I mean, that's the scenario with us as well. I mean, my wife earns double what I'm doing at the moment. It's not exactly. It's not just the desire; it's the financial implications as well.
What about when you're both at home? Is there a particular split of parenting jobs or chores between the two of you? So, is there a clear division of labour where there are particular tasks that are yours or particular tasks that are your wife's, or do you just do whatever needs to be done?
I wouldn't say it's a clear division, but I do the majority of the washing up and have done for the majority of our relationship, pre-kids. My wife does more cleaning than me, for sure. And I do the bins. It's kind of irritating because it's like going with Theresa May's boy jobs and girl jobs, but that is annoyingly that is what we're doing. I tend to do the bins unless I'm in a real rush on a Tuesday, like now working. And I'm leaving before my wife. I might sort of mention, "Oh, can you do the bins?" But really, it tends to be I do that. Yeah, there is a bit of a division. Cooking used to be my mainstay because I was at home. Now it's more 50-50. It's just kind of settled into its thing.
And I guess we're quite similar. I mean, division of jobs has almost kind of just evolved naturally over time. So, bins and lawns are me, and laundry and school admin are my wife's. But otherwise, a lot of the other tasks do get done to a certain degree interchangeably, except organisation. If something needs to be planned and organised properly, Heather does it. If it needs to be unplanned and chaotic, then it's my responsibility. But equally, it's not like I'm completely incapable of fending for myself. So, funnily enough, we've just come off a long weekend where Heather was in Dublin for 3 days meeting up with relatives. So I had the kids from Saturday morning through to late Monday evening. So that meant, a full weekend of stuff. Getting haircuts done, taking Cara to a gym class, preventing World War III from breaking out. I might have failed on that one. Getting the kids to and from school on Monday. I did all the food shopping for the weekend, cooked all the meals. There's no phoning up Domino's for an easy life in our household. And I don't cope with single parenting as well as Heather does by any means, but I can deal with it. It's there's no need for anyone to end up in A&E. No one has yet called out child protection services on me, and yet that's kind of where that kind of old-fashioned dad stereotype and people's low expectations sometimes kick in. So when I was in the office on Friday, I mentioned to a few people, when you're talking about what you're up to this weekend. So I mentioned to them that I was home alone with the kids, and a couple of them joked, asking how I was going to cope on my own. I mean, yeah, it was meant jokingly, but that's never something you would say to a mum whose husband was heading away for the weekend, even as a joke. And I had a a similar reaction from my mother, who asked me on no fewer than 3 occasions whether I wanted her to come up for the weekend to help look after the kids. And she, she asked it in a supportive and very well-meaning way, of course, but she just couldn't seem to compute when I just kind of waved her off and told her that I'd be fine because, I'm a man and apparently I can't manage on my own. And of course, us dads love it, don't we, when people see us out in public with the kids and talk about us babysitting the children.
I know.
Has that ever actually happened to you? Because I have to admit, it's never happened to me.
Oh my word! Yes, lots. So many. I can't even remember. Like, there's variations like babysitting today, or mum's day off, or giving mum a break. It's not friends telling me this. This is strangers. Like one time, I remember going to a bank and someone said something like that, and then one time waiting to cross a road and someone said that to me, or walked into a shop and someone said that to me. And it was like that someone who worked on the counter. It's just, I think they're well-meaning, and maybe they think they're striking conversation, or they're being sympathetic. And I'm not saying they're not, but just it just kind of reveals an underlying prejudice almost. I mean that in the softest sense, but that the mother is the one that's almost conditioned to do this role, and for a father it must be really difficult. So you're doing so well by doing it because you're not a mother. Well done, you.
And there's you that spent 5 years doing that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it was, more of the examples were earlier on, so within the first 3 years. But initially, I was just slightly taken aback, but also I say this story a few times, so you may have read it somewhere else. But when my daughter was a baby, I'd be like bottle feeding her out and about, and I get strangers telling me like what a great dad I am, and I just think, what mother has ever been congratulated by a stranger for formula feeding her baby? It's just crazy. Just the sight of a dad bottle feeding their baby that is just, so amazing to someone that they feel they need to congratulate them. Just a mother, trying to do something like that would just be either ignored or looked on with scorn.
Yeah, a lot of these old stereotypes still remain, don't they? But equally, I guess there's no denying that things have changed quite a bit, and mostly for the better over the past 30 to 40 years. I mean, in our parents' generation, it wasn't uncommon for a dad not to be present at the birth of a baby. Certainly that would have happened much more than would be the case today. And I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm willing to bet that very few dads took more than a day or two off before returning to work. Indeed, that the whole idea of paternity leave is a surprisingly recent one. In the UK, paid paternity leave was only introduced into law in 2003, and even now it only provides limited financial payments for 2 weeks. And you compare that to Sweden, which has had paternity leave and paternity pay for much longer, and dads are entitled to 3 months paternity pay. I mean, Simon, you were still working, weren't you, when your daughter was born, and you didn't become a stay-at-home dad until your wife returned to work. Did you take any time off after the birth?
Well, it's not technically true. I just finished a long contract, conveniently, about a week before our daughter was born, and then I was at home for the next 6 weeks, and then I started a contract. So I wasn't actually working, but so it was almost like it was an extended period of paternity leave, just completely unpaid because I was between contracts. And then I was contracted, and I did a short contract for 3 months, and then chose not to renew it because that's when we had the conversation about what we were going to do. It would have been an ongoing job basically if I wanted it to. Yeah, that's when we, before that we had the conversation about what we were going to do. My wife was going to return to work, and it was essentially about we both didn't feel happy handing our child over to a stranger yet. And I was happy to be at home for all other reasons we discussed, and that's how that panned out.
With me, I took my full 2 weeks off after all 3 of our kids were born, helped by the fact that my employer grants 2 weeks paternity leave with full pay rather than the paltry £109, I think it is, per week that statutory paternity leave offers.
But do you think you would have done it anyway, if it had been the statutory?
I think I would have done, but only because we could have afforded to have done.
So I don't know, it's almost, a lot of dads can weather the 2 weeks, whether it's statutory or the company pays full pay. It's not so much the right to have leave, but it's the right to have paid leave. And also, like you're saying, you had 2 weeks full paid leave, but If you'd been offered 4 weeks paid leave, would you have taken that, like full paid leave?
Yeah, I think first time round with Isaac, I definitely would have done, because I think first time you haven't been parents before, you haven't got the experience, and there's so many things that you get to see that you might otherwise miss, and first time mums in particular often find that those first few weeks can be tougher than expected, what with the physical recovery, the potential for postnatal depression, troubles with breastfeeding, and all the million and one curveballs that life can throw your way. But second and third time rounds, maybe I wouldn't have taken the full. Maybe I wouldn't have taken 4 weeks. I might only have taken 2, because every successive birth is an adjustment, and it becomes more difficult. You at least have that prior experience of having coped first time round. So I think it would have been more of a judgment call second or third time round. Yeah, it's great to have the option, even if not all dads, or even if only a minority of dads were to take it, to actually know that you have that option and you're given the similar rights and treated in the same way as the mother would, that you have the opportunity to to experience all that kind of stuff that otherwise you might have missed, and that many of our own fathers maybe didn't get a chance to experience. Before we go, what have you been up to over the last week or so?
Just getting back into the swing of things with working, and our daughter, her routine going as well, and but nothing really beyond that I can think. Just trying to get our routine, as much as it can be a routine, into place.
Yeah, as we talked about earlier, I've just had 3 days on my own with the kids, but I get my own revenge soon enough, because I'm away for the next 2 weekends. I'm at Blog On in Manchester next weekend, and then London the weekend after. It's at Brit Mums, where I'm a finalist for the Reader's Choice Awards. So I'm getting in some practice with my, really, I don't mind not winning, I'm just happy to be here face.
Well, good luck.
That's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find the two of us online.
I blog as Man vs Pink, Man vs Pink, and that's manversuspink.com, and Man vs Pink on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And I'm at Thatcham Dad, and my blog is slouchingtowardsthatcham.com. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, from our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. You can also follow us on Twitter at Parents Podcast, and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thanks for listening, and do please join us again next week. Good night.